Sovereignty can be defined as the ultimate authority within a polity. Sovereignty requires that the modern territorial state be free from the external interference of other states and have recognition both domestically and internationally as a sovereign entity. The implication of this kind of concept is that sovereignty seems to be something either you have or you don't. Edward Galeano contradicts this notion with his statement that in South America, sovereignty is mortgaged. U.S. expansionist views in the early 20th century for economic growth and world dominance peaked as President Theodore Roosevelt took office. With a strong foreign affairs policy and economic agenda and hemispheric hegemony, the U.S. claimed that it was owned a moral domination over the Western Hemisphere, including Latin America.
Referring to the U.S. continued dependency of Latin America to achieve world power, Galeano's position of the evolution of the Panama Canal is but another historical testament to U.S. corporatism in Latin America.
As Galeano states, Colombia soon afterward received $25 million in indemnity. It was the price of a country that was born so that the United States could have a route between two oceans.
This is a clear example of how the U.S. used Latin America as its backyard, even at the early stages of development in the region. Although the canal zone is now a safe passage for international vessels, it served as an international conflict that led to its creation.
For Galeano, the words of Roosevelt, "I took the canal zone and let Congress debate," foreshadowed the ongoing U.S. agenda towards Latin America, and essentially it was how Panama was invented.
Falkland Islands are disputed between both the United Kingdom as well as Argentina.
The dispute between the islands have dated back to the 1960s when the British started to use the de facto sovereignty over the islands since 1833.
The de facto sovereignty, also known as actual sovereignty, deals with seeing if control in fact exists.
On the contrary, Argentina has disagreed with this statement for a long period of time due to the fact that they had been in control of the Falkland Islands for a short period of time prior to 1833.
Both countries want the same thing, supreme and independent authority over the islands. It was in 1982 when the Falkland War began due to the invasion of Argentina on the islands.
If one were to ask a person living on the island what country they would associate themselves with, majority of them would say Britain.
This is due to the fact that the United Kingdom passed the British nationality, the Falkland Islands Act, in 1983, which granted people on the island British citizenship.
Since this had been such an ongoing dispute between the two countries, the United Nations has intervened and has demanded both the United Kingdom as well as Argentina to begin dialogue over the sovereignty claim.
The United States would eventually control many Guatemalan resources, as well as control over communication and transportation within the country.
The same way in which Galeano speaks about the ways in which Latin America is constantly stripped of its resources, Guatemala is one of those many cases.
The American government was granted basically anything it asked for, from the ability to construct railroads and establish communication with the country.
One of the many things that the United States Chiquita brand got away with was that they did not have to pay taxes for 99 years.
The American imposition on the country eventually led to many violent demonstrations by the people demanding a change and demanding control of their own lands.
Latin America, seen as a land of opportunities.
Oil. It's part of the fabric of our society, and we use it to get around. And when you think about it, almost everything we buy in the shops has production inputs that can ultimately be traced back to the oil industry.
Galeano explains that multinational corporations do not belong to the nations in which they operate. Their multinationality consists in a funneling of petroleum and dollars from the 4 points of the compass into the capital system's center of power.
And do you think oil companies have the power to change people's lives?
Absolutely, yeah. They've got the power to do whatever they want to do. They are far more powerful than any government that will ever be elected. And they can never be held to account because they've got the court system in their back pocket. They've got the politicians in their back pocket. They are the so-called civilized world.
Policies and alliances are formed between nations in order to guarantee access to petroleum.
For Venezuela, China is seen as a counterweight to Washington's hostility, while China sees Venezuela as being crucial to gaining influence and resources in Latin America.
What we see is that the U.S. hasn't changed in its essence. The world is changing, the U.S. isn't. This isn't a problem just for Latin America, but rather for the entire world. This country has military and economic power, and at the same time, it's not changing its expansionary and imperialistic policy. Their policy is of unwelcome intervention, of coups and threats. It's so-called policy of carrots and sticks. And today, Latin America has more power and dignity to oppose and resist this policy. We have more strength and more dignity, whereas this policy remains unchanged.
New this morning, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez has given Barack Obama a gift. There you see it happening. It is a book, and the English title of which is Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent.
The book itself, Alex, as we've talked about earlier, it really is symbolic, actually, of how many Latin American political leaders, many Latin Americans feel about the United States and Europe in general, grievances against the United States, of how the role the United States, they believe, played in previously, and whether it was getting involved in domestic politics down in South America or different regime issues.